junkies like a setting sun.
That's the needle and the damage done going into the song words. And what I love is that edit point where you're listening to this song, and when you first hear it, I think you don't even realize that it's live because you don't hear any audience noise or anything at the beginning. So it's just, you know, Neil Young doing this beautiful, heavy acoustic song. And then at the very end, you know, there's this big swell of applause, and at that moment, one thing is that you realize that it's live, and then just when you're kind of taking that in, where the applause would normally be allowed to kind of run a little bit and then probably fade out, it just slams into the next song, which is not a live track. It's a really weird thing that they did to just cut the clapping. It's a hard edit, no fades, no bullshit, and they just slam it into this very different other music. That little point to me is really, that's editing. And it's not just editing in the sense that it's literally editing, but it's editing in the sense that you crash two things together that don't necessarily have any sense or reason to be side by side, and something really like crazy and weird comes out of it.
Yeah.
What comes out of it in the long haul is this sort of perfect whole, and you just get the feeling like it's all like one ride that you're supposed to be on in a certain way, and you're just on it, and you go with it, and whatever comes around the bend, you have to deal with. As a filmmaker, I'm probably more inspired by music. You tend to create movies in your head when you listen to it. That's always been kind of, I think, really a major reason of why and how I make films.
When I was 23 years old, I had an opportunity to be traveling around Morocco. I went by myself. It was one of the greatest trips I've ever taken. I mostly traveled around the northern part of the country in this old, like, 1970s Peugeot that I rented in Marrakesh. It was an amazing trip on a lot of levels. You know, it was just such an amazingly different culture than I'd ever encountered. It kind of made the whole Western world seem like one thing. It was a little bit scary, like, because it was so different and I was on my own. And I was traveling around in this car that I'd rented, noticing as I would go in and out of towns that there'd always be people kind of like hanging out hitchhiking as you entered a town and as you left. And I was the only car on the road I would see with just one person in it. Sometimes there were people sitting in the trunks of cars, and people would always kind of pick up hitchhikers and share the gas and that kind of thing. And at first I was sort of nervous to pick up hitchhikers, but as the trip went on, I kind of got more familiar with my surroundings and felt a little more comfortable and slowly started picking up hitchhikers. I was on my way from Fez, which is in sort of the north middle part of the country, up in the mountains, back down to Marrakesh, which is kind of in between the mountainous region of the country and the desert that's in the south that everybody's more familiar with. I was driving through this really little small town. On the outskirts of this town were these three Berber women wearing, you know, head-to-toe veils. They seemed pretty safe, and they were hitchhiking, so I picked them up. One of the things that was an advantage traveling around there is that most people spoke French, and I can kind of make my way through French. I'm not really fluent, but at least we can understand each other. And I realized after I picked them up, they only spoke Arabic or Berber or, you know, whatever language people speak in that part of Morocco, and we had no way of communicating with each other at all, other than, you know, they kind of pointed on the map to the town they were going to, which was a couple hours ahead of where we were, and I understood that, and so we started driving. They were pretty young, I think. I think they were probably in their late teens or early 20s, it's hard to tell, but they were sort of giggly. Like, you know, I'd look in the rearview mirror and they'd laugh, and then, you know, I'd start driving, you know, or they'd do something and I'd laugh, and it was really kind of a fun little moment. We had this view out in front of us of sort of like the plains of Morocco, like opening up, you know, as we were driving down out of the mountains, and the sun was kind of setting. It was really beautiful. And all of a sudden, one of them started kind of doing this rhythmic clapping. There was probably like a kind of thing. Pretty soon the other two started clapping along, you know, not the exact same rhythm, but kind of interlocking rhythms, and then they all started singing. And it was like this, probably the most beautiful song I've ever heard in my life. And they kept, you know, they all had different interlocking like melodies and parts that they sang, and it went around and around and around. And it just seemed like for hours. You know, this song just kept going on and on and on, and sort of like all sense of time passed away, and the countryside was so beautiful, and I would sort of look in the mirror and they would all be singing, and they would kind of smile, and, you know, I literally felt sort of transported off of this planet for the time that this song was going on. I had no idea, you know, how long it was, or how long this trip had been. The sun kind of went down, and it had gotten dark, and we were pulling into the town that they had pointed out that they wanted me to drop them off in, and we sort of drove into the middle of the town. There's usually a little market area in a lot of these towns. And they all started getting out of the car, and I said, hold on, you know, I want to try to take a picture. And I had this old Polaroid land camera, which is the ones where you take the picture and then you have to pull the film out and wait for it to develop, and then you peel it apart and the picture comes out. I didn't have a flash for it, but I had a little snappy camera with a flash, but that camera didn't have any film in it. I had this idea that I could sort of hold the land camera up and take the picture, and while the shutter was open on the Polaroid camera, I could flash my little snappy camera for the flash, and then it would, you know, I'd be able to get enough light. So they all stood outside the car, and I sort of said, you know, let me take a picture. And so I took this picture, and they all kind of scurried off into the market, and that was it. And I had to wait about a minute and a half and then peel the thing apart to see the photo. And so I did that, and I waited, and they'd all left and were gone, and peeled the photo apart, and everything came out. Like, you could see the whole background and everything, except right where they were standing was just blank, like as if they were, you know, never there at all. And it just put a perfect kind of end to this, what seemed like an otherworldly experience in the first place. Yeah, that's what it was.
My parents had gone to the Newport Jazz Festival, and they come back with all these albums from there, and I got a chance to start listening to more jazz at that time. The next year after that, I was maybe about 13 or so. They took me, and we went back and saw to the festival again. It was the year before Woodstock, and they had opened up the jazz festival to all these different types of groups. So you had people like Sly and the Family Stone on it, and Led Zeppelin and John McLaughlin and all these people, in addition to like Chico Hamilton and Elvin Jones and a lot of people like that. A lot of people kind of descended on Newport because it's like this resort town, and they just had a lot of hippies and all kinds of people. They kind of overran the city. It was really too many people. And I went there with my sisters and stuff, and maybe my parents weren't with us because we stayed in a hotel room, and there were maybe like 10 people in the hotel room, and all their friends were there, and it was just a really amazing time for me. They had clinics and workshops, and I got a chance to hear people up close and really hear what instruments sound like in person, you know, really played by a real master of the instrument. The workshops were important because I was just standing like 10 feet away and listening to Chico Hamilton talk about the drums, or I saw a drum workshop with Elvin Jones and Chico Hamilton, and I think Roy Haynes and some other people playing. And just seeing, you know, Elvin just sweating all over the place, and he's breaking sticks, and they're flying out in the crowd and everything. And for me, that was kind of like a real eye-opener because I got a chance to hear live a lot of people who I'd heard on record. Because I was younger, I didn't get out to hear a lot at that age, so I was really into records. And I know, for me, one of the records that really influenced me a lot when I was younger was this record by a piano player by the name of Duke Pearson. and he's a great piano player and composer, and he has a CD. I mean, at that time it was an album called The Right Touch. It covered a lot of ground because it was like a hard bop type of sound, but they were original compositions, and he was doing a lot of arranging and writing, and he had Freddie Hubbard was on it, and for me, the guy I was listening to mostly at that period was Stanley Turrentine. I was like, he was the main guy I was listening to, because he played jazz, but he had like an R&B kind of sound. It was very soulful, and had a real basis in the blues and everything. And I felt was very expressive. And for the way I heard the saxophone, he kind of epitomized like the way I heard the saxophone at that time. You know, I wore that record out. I learned a lot of the solos, his solos on there, and I got a chance to hear him play live a couple of times when he came to Cleveland. If I had to pick out one record, it would be The Right Touch. I think that's, that one kind of like, because I spent the most time with it. It wasn't until later that maybe I was 15 or 16 and I started listening to Charlie Parker and people like that. But initially it was, I think Stanley Turrentine for saxophone was like who really captured my ear. When I was younger, I always knew I wanted to play music, and that's, I never made a conscious decision that that's what I was going to do. I just kind of always felt that that's what I wanted to do, and I don't remember a time when I just said, yes, this is what I want. I just kind of always felt that that's what I wanted to do. And I always wrote music, and I was always, writing tunes and things like that. And I never had one day that like there was some kind of, great epiphany or anything like that. It just, I don't know. It was just me. I was part of, playing saxophone and playing clarinet and all that stuff. That was just, that's just what I did. It's just, it's something I knew it was something I could do by myself, and I like that, because I was kind of, solitary. I'd be in my room practicing and stuff, or listening to music, and so I like that aspect of this. There was an individual part, component to it, and I guess that appealed to me too. That's it? That's it. Oh, man.
Okay. I'm going to talk about Sonny Ray, Sonny Ra, Sun Ra, and how profound of an influence he's had on me as a musician. All my friends really know this record, and it's kind of like my theme song, my anthem. It really gets me going, and I think you'll understand why right here. See, that's the part right there. I don't know if you caught it really, but right there. Woo! Then, of course, Skateboarding USA. Now, if you don't know this, a lot of people don't know this, but Sneakers and Lace, one of my favorite records. The song Skateboarding, Sidewalk Convoy, Down the Street. Ballet is kind of, it's not a really good song. Skatewalk Boogie's pretty burning. Skateboarding USA, it's they take the Beach Boys song and kind of change it around. And Little Skateboard Queen is really hot. Just a really good record, and you look at the packaging, some of this looks like some of the Tortoise kind of artwork and isotope kind of aesthetics, obviously the prominent, skateboard right in the middle of the front cover. It's like some of the Tortoise stuff. This is a Mech Men single, probably like the second band I was in, and this to me was like the point where we just figured out that we could make our own records, even if they were ridiculous or great, whatever. Here's how this one sounds. Wait, it's really good because a lot of variation in the tempo and the speed in the song. You'll hear it. See, it was kind of ahead of its time, you know. Not many people did hardcore, but it was just like slow up and speed down. So, you know, I mean, you probably heard a lot of that stuff, like BFW was using it for a bunch of commercials and stuff, and that's when it got out of hand. I had to quit. Couldn't take it anymore. You know, I'd be trying to call my friend, and he'd be like, well, you got to talk to my manager. And I'd be like, well, can't we just do this without the managers? All right, this is ridiculous.
Senior in high school, first year of college, I only listened to blues. It was my first of many sort of obsessions that usually last like 2 years. You know, I made the obvious connections like, oh, the Rolling Stones played blues, you know, or they loved all these people. I wasn't suddenly wearing blues outfits and such, but I was, you know, I didn't have special shoes. And a friend of the family named Steve Beale was a blues musician. The guy who he played with was called Eddie Taylor, and he's sort of a legend, but also like hardly anyone would know who he was unless you were like a blues scholar type. But of course this, you know, really impressed me immensely. And that this guy that I knew was actually played in his band. And I didn't know anybody who, you know, played in bands or whatever. So the whole myth was quite colorful at this time. So anyways, what happened was I went to school in Kansas City, at the Kansas City Art Institute. My first, like right out of high school, I went there. And somehow it happened, I don't know if I was on a committee or something or what, but the school put on concerts and I was somehow able to, it was almost like this strange reunion show. I got that band to come to the school and play this show. Just the fact that this really old dude could come and play the school, and that I was somewhat responsible for it. And my first sort of foray into thinking about, you know, what has to happen to play music and what is a band and all this stuff. My whole life before that, of course, I was obsessed with music and all, and this is my first sort of taste of, yeah, you know, seeing someone that actually does it. And I know that Eddie Taylor died shortly after that concert in Kansas City. I think I became, at that point, aware of, you know, the history involved in the making of records and music, and you know, I sort of started to make that connection, and this big gap was brought together.
I was studying jazz, and I was like listening to all this Miles and like Art Blakey, and I mean, great music, but really like worked out, you know, sophisticated music. I was a guitar major, and I was totally freaking out because I had to do these recitals, and I couldn't really play this material. You know, I was practicing all the time, but it just wasn't my thing, you know. And I was like, man, what am I gonna do? What am I doing here? And I actually had sort of a nervous breakdown, you know. And I got to a point where I stopped going to class. All I did was listen to records. And I went to the library and found this record, put it on. It's like, man, this is happening. This is where it's at. I never heard any like jazz music like that. It was just so raw sounding. It's a Chicago band called Air. Henry Threadgill was playing like all different type of horns, like tenor saxophone, clarinet, baritone, I think. Fred Hopkins is playing bass, and Steve McCall is playing percussion. I knew from listening to that record that I wanted to be a drummer. That record like changed my life, for sure.
I think my #1 record is probably The Specials' first album, entitled The Specials. When I first got this record, it probably didn't leave the turntable for about a year. You know, it just constantly kept getting played, and I've had it probably since it came out in 80, I probably got it in 82, and I still listen to this record. Like, I still put it on, I still play it. The lyrics are incredibly dark and depressing, and kept with the kind of punk ethos that I was used to with, you know, growing up in hardcore in DC. In that cynicism, there was an awareness, you know, the fact that they were talking about these issues, you know, these things, that they made it aware, that the fact that they were in a band talking about it, discussing it, and putting it out there, it was not lethargy and it wasn't giving up, it was just putting it out there. They took from a variety of different different cultures, but also different ways of life and different ways of looking at things. It's kind of multiculturalism, but in a way that a city is multicultural, not in the way that Napoleon ice cream is multicultural. Like, Napoleon ice cream has these separate, distinct flavors: vanilla, chocolate, strawberry. But a city has an overall flavor of, you know, it's rich because it has different cultures. Specials still have that thing where I'd be intimidated to meet them, and I'd be like, these guys are more than just regular people. A friend of mine who I used to be in a band with, I was talking to him on his cell phone just last week, and we had been talking about Terry Hall, who's the singer for this group. And he's like, I just passed Terry Hall. And I was like, get out of here. And I was like, what are you gonna do? He's like, I'm pulling over. And a couple seconds later, I hear him say, hello, Terry. And then all of a sudden, I hear Terry's voice. Terry's like, hey, how you doing? So Fred's talking to Terry Hall, and I'm listening to it over the cell phone. And Fred's like, what are you doing in town? They have a little conversation. Fred says how he loves his music, and he's bought his solo records, and he still influences him. And then as soon as Terry Hall left, we're like a couple of like teenagers, like, oh my God, you just talked to Terry Hall. He's like, you heard it. You heard him talking, right? And I was like, that was totally him. That's insane. That's insane.
What I'm going to talk about is a record that I came upon in 1979 when I was 14. And I had been obsessed with records since I was a kid. The first records I had were all my dad's records, big band 45s, my grandmother's 78s. I had an all-in-one stereo that had a big set of headphones, an 8-track player, a record player, an AM/FM radio, and I could play 78s, 45s, anything on it. So the first records that I got into when I was a kid were all the records that were in my house. I went and raided my dad's records. I went in the attic and stole my grandmother's 78s. In 1979, my sister went away for her first year of boarding school, so then her room became fair game for my record hunting. Still couldn't get to a record store really in Delaware. There weren't any that were accessible on my bicycle, so my sister's room was the next place to go. I lifted a bunch of records from her, most of stuff like Elvis's greatest hits and Genesis that I was like, pff, pff, whatever. I wasn't that into them, but I discovered this one. You can see that my sister put her name on it, so when she played it at parties in the basements, people wouldn't steal her records, but it wasn't safe for me. It funneled all my energy. I knew at 14 more what I didn't want to be part of than what I wanted to be part of. It sort of like solidified all my spazzy energy, all my total, all the things that are dorky about me were solidified by James White and his Contortions. For me, the Contortions open up the door to Devo, which is a lifelong obsession of mine. They opened up the door to REM and all these other bands for me, just like Sonny Rollins opened up the door to a world of jazz for me, and the Temptations opened up the door to Al Green, who opened up the door to Curtis Mayfield, to a soul obsession. You know, in each sort of musical direction that I go, there's always been a door opener, but this was like the significant one at 14. It sent me out to go seek out records beyond my home, beyond classic rock radio, because I had found something, I don't know, that spoke to the true spaz in me. So there it was. The Contortions. Thanks. Thanks, Tether.
Like, I want to talk about the Flaming Lips, and I was going to say, like, why I wanted to talk about the Flaming Lips, and then I was going to talk about the story, and then I was going to talk about why it's so great, and then I was going to talk a little bit about the show, and then I was going to sort of try to tell why it's so great. Hello. Here I am with my friend, the African Violet, who agrees with me that the Flaming Lips. So I was thinking about, like, shows that were really great, and I thought that I was thinking about them over time, because obviously you have a lot of them when you go to a lot of shows. They're, I mean, not a lot, but you know, you could probably count them on your two hands. And I thought over time, all the shows that I had seen, that one band sort of popped up more than once, and that was the Flaming Lips. So there was this show at Hoboken, I mean, in Maxwell's. The thing about it is that I talk about this being one of the most, it was like an epiphany, and yet at the same time, I don't remember what they played. Well, I mean, the thing is, I thought it was really hard to choose. I don't really know. I mean, there are standout shows. I think that it's this feeling in my gut that I feel when I go to a show like that, where I'm so excited and electrically charged by the music that I can't wait to, like, go to work the next day. No, I really do feel like it's just charged. It's like your batteries are recharged. You realize that you're not jaded anymore. I don't know. It's like the slate has been erased. You know, I'm not jaded anymore. Everything is new again. I have this, you know, newborn excitement for not only that band, but every band that I'm going to see from then on, and I'm just excited after a show like that. That sounds horrible. I haven't done a very good job of explaining this. Scratch that.
I think everybody has a point when they realize there's a difference between Led Zeppelin and what we called where I came from, local bands. Suddenly it clicks. It's like, oh wait, I can be in a band? My friends can be in bands? I didn't, you know, oh, I thought just the Cars in Boston were bands, and that was, you know, it was a totally different thing. I guess underground rock had completely eluded me. I was trying to learn how to play all the Police and U2 songs on my bass. Someone turned me on to this record one day. It was a local compilation. It's called Nobody Gets on the Guest List, Throbbing Lobster compilation. And it was just a compilation of local bands in Boston. And I listened to this thing and I thought it was amazing. And it just blew my mind. And you know, I had never thought of going to see a band at a club. It was all, you know, bands playing stadiums. Bands don't, you know. From here on out, as Mr. Local Music Guy, I went to see bands all the time, started buying records. The second Throbbing Lobster compilation had a band on it called the Volcano Sons that became my favorite band when I later joined that band. So it was a big turning point for me. Looking back, I really wish I had found out about stuff sooner. You know, if I had found out sooner, I would have gone to see Mission of Burma. Pretty much after this point, I was buying so many local records and indie label records immediately. You know, I went to college in '83, and so it was the huge heyday for Homestead and SST, and you know, and what's the other one? Touch and Go. These bands are really awesome.
I need to get a shot of an empty chair.
You do?
Yeah.
What's that for?
Put it in.